Doctor stared at the data screen in his laboratory aboard the research vessel. The numbers made no sense. According to every psychological model developed over 3,000 years of galactic research, Earth should be dead. Not physically dead, but mentally, socially, spiritually collapsed. The humans down there should be scattered tribes of broken minds, unable to cooperate, unable to function, unable to do much more than survive day to day. But they weren't. He tapped his secondary manipulator against the desk, a nervous habit from his youth on. Behind him, Sora made a small sound of distress. The Meridian empath had been monitoring emotional broadcasts from the planet's surface for 6 cycles now, and the strain showed in the way her skin had shifted from its usual soft blue to a pale, almost translucent shade. "I don't understand it," she said quietly. "The pain down there is enormous. It echoes up through the atmosphere like a scream, but underneath it there's something else, something I've never felt before." The analyst rotated his optical sensors toward her. His species didn't do emotion, which made him excellent at behavioral prediction. Cold logic, pure mathematics, probability cascades that could forecast the development of civilizations across. He'd been certain about Earth, certain it would be a cautionary tale, a warning to other species about the dangers of rapid technological development without sufficient psychological evolution. He'd been wrong. "The mathematics are impossible," stated, his voice synthesized and flat. "Humans have experienced 17 extinction-level psychological traumas in the last century alone, 2 global wars, multiple pandemics, nuclear weapons deployed in anger, environmental collapse, economic disasters affecting billions. Any one of these events should have fractured their species' cohesion. Combined, they should have created a cascading failure of all social structures. But they didn't." Finished. He stood up, his long frame unfolding to its full height. "Which is why we're here. The Galactic Psychological Institute needs to understand this before first contact. We need to know if humans are somehow immune to trauma, if our models are wrong, or if there's something else happening that we've never encountered before." 3 cycles later, they landed on Earth in the city humans called Seattle. They wore holographic disguises, appearing as humans themselves. The technology was perfect, and they'd spent months studying human behavior, speech patterns, and social customs. They registered themselves as cultural researchers from a European university, which seemed to satisfy the human authorities. Their first real observation came on a rainy Tuesday morning at a community center in a neighborhood that had been devastated by flooding 5 years earlier. Had chosen this location specifically. According to their records, 37 humans had died in the flood. Hundreds had lost their homes. The economic damage had been catastrophic for this small community. By every model, this place should still be broken. Instead, watched a human woman named Sarah lead a group of 20 other humans through what she called a support group meeting. She was 43 years old, had lost her husband and both parents in the flood, and her home had been completely destroyed. She should be, according to psychological assessment, deeply dysfunctional, possibly catatonic, at minimum, unable to form social bonds or take on leadership responsibilities. She was laughing. Not fake laughter, not the forced sounds of someone pretending to be all right. Genuine amusement at something another human had said. Sora, sitting beside in the back of the room, trembled. "I feel it," she whispered. "The grief is there. It's massive, like a black hole in her chest, but she's not being crushed by it. She's somehow orbiting it, using its gravity to move forward. How is that possible?" The meeting continued for 2 hours. Humans stood up, one by one, and told their stories. A man who'd lost his sister talked about starting a business to help other flood survivors. A young woman who'd watched her best friend drown described how she'd become a crisis counselor. An elderly man who'd lost everything spoke about volunteering to help build early warning systems in other vulnerable communities. None of them had forgotten. None of them had moved on, in the sense that they'd left their trauma behind. Instead, They'd done something that didn't exist in any of the team's psychological frameworks. They'd integrated their losses into their identities and used them as fuel. After the meeting, approached Sarah. He'd prepared his questions carefully, designed to sound like academic inquiry while extracting the data he needed. Ms., thank you for allowing us to observe. I'm researching community resilience after natural disasters. Can I ask you something? How do you find the strength to lead this group after what you've been through? Sarah smiled, but it was a complex expression, sad and strong at the same time. I don't think of it as strength exactly. After the flood, I was destroyed, completely broken. For 6 months, I couldn't get out of bed most days. I didn't want to live. Noted this. It matched the expected response. But then something shifted, Sarah continued. I realized that David, my husband, he died trying to save our neighbor's kids. He got them to safety, but the water took him. And I thought, what does it mean if I just give up now? What did he die for if I waste the life he saved? So you honor his memory, suggested, using a human concept he'd learned. No, Sarah said, and her voice was firm. It's bigger than that. I carry him with me. His love, his courage, his stupid jokes, everything. He's not gone, not really. He's part of how I see the world now. When I help someone in this group, I'm using what he taught me. When I laugh, I'm laughing for both of us. Does that make sense? It didn't, not according to any psychological model new. The dead were gone. Memory was information storage, nothing more. Holding onto the dead should create cognitive dissonance, should prevent healing, should trap the survivor in a loop of pain. But Sarah wasn't trapped. She was free in a way that seemed impossible. Over the next several weeks, they found the pattern repeating everywhere. In New York, a man named Washington who'd survived a terrorist attack had become a paramedic. He ran toward danger now, he explained, because his best friend had died pushing him out of the way of the explosion. I'm living the life James bought for me, said. I'm not going to waste it being afraid. In Tokyo, they met an elderly woman named who'd survived the atomic bombing as a child. She'd spent 70 years working for peace, traveling the world, teaching about the horrors of nuclear war. I carry the dead with me, she said through a translator. 10,000 voices speak through me. How can I be silent? In Mumbai, a young woman named who'd lost her entire family in a pandemic ran a clinic in the slums, treating the patients for free. My mother was a doctor, she explained. She died treating patients. Now I'm both of us. Her hands in my hands, we keep working. Process the data every night, running it through every analytical framework in the database. The results were consistent and impossible. Humans were exhibiting what they called post-traumatic growth, but it was more radical than the clinical term suggested. They weren't just recovering from trauma. They were using it as a catalyst for fundamental transformation. The mathematics suggest they're rewriting their own psychological architecture in response to catastrophic loss, reported one evening. Instead of breaking, they're rebuilding themselves along different parameters, often stronger than before. It shouldn't work. The energy cost alone should be prohibitive. Sora had a different perspective. She'd been overwhelmed by human emotion for weeks now, barely sleeping, constantly filtering the intense feelings that radiated from every human they encountered. It's not just growth, she said. They're weaponizing their grief. I don't mean that in a violent way. I mean they're taking the most painful thing a being can experience and turning it into purpose, into fuel, into meaning. But meaning is subjective, observed. It's not real. To them it is, said quietly. He'd been reviewing footage from their interviews, watching human faces, studying human body language. They create meaning deliberately. When the universe takes something from them, they decide what it will mean instead of accepting meaninglessness. It's an act of defiance. He pulled up a particular interview on the screen. It was from their visit to a small town in Kansas, where a tornado had killed 42 people 3 years earlier. They'd spoken with a man named John, a farmer who'd lost his wife, his son, and his brother in the storm. John had said something that had recorded and replayed dozens of times. You want to know the secret. There is no secret, you just decide that tomorrow matters, even when it doesn't feel like it does, even when you're sure it doesn't. You decide and you keep deciding every single day. And eventually, enough tomorrows pile up that you find yourself somewhere new, somewhere you couldn't have imagined when you were in the dark. That's all. You just don't quit. Paused the recording. They've weaponized hope itself, he said. Not naive optimism. This is something else. It's hope as a deliberate choice in the face of overwhelming evidence that hope is irrational, and somehow that irrational hope produces rational outcomes. He looked at his team, Sara exhausted and overwhelmed, confused by data that didn't fit his models, and himself, a psychologist with 300 years of experience, completely out of his depth. We need to go deeper, decided. We need to understand the mechanism, because if we're going to recommend first contact, the Institute needs to know what kind of species we're dealing with, and right now, I'm not sure we have any idea. The quantum link chimed. It was time for his weekly report to the Galactic Psychological Institute Council. Took a deep breath and began composing his message. How could he explain what he'd seen? How could he make them understand that humans had somehow evolved a psychological adaptation, that everything they knew about trauma, grief, and loss? He settled on simple honesty. We came to study a species that should have collapsed. Instead, we found something unprecedented. Humans don't just survive catastrophic loss. They're transformed by it in ways that make them stronger. We need more time to understand how this is possible, but I believe we may have to fundamentally revise our understanding of grief itself. He sent the message and watched it disappear into quantum space. Somewhere, millions of light years away, the council would read his words and probably think he'd lost his objectivity. Maybe he had, but the evidence was undeniable. Humans were different, and the galaxy needed to know why before it was too late. The next phase of research required deeper access, needed to understand not just what humans did with their grief, but how they did it. What was the internal mechanism that allowed them to transform suffering into strength? He decided they needed to conduct detailed personal interviews, getting humans to explain their thought processes step by step. Their first deep interview was with a woman named Dr. Lisa in Phoenix. She was a psychologist herself, which made the conversation particularly interesting. She'd lost her daughter, Emma, to leukemia 7 years earlier. Emma had been 9 years old. Had prepared carefully for this interview. The loss of offspring was universally devastating across all known species. Such a loss often led to permanent psychological withdrawal. Parents who lost children sometimes stopped emitting emotional frequencies entirely, becoming living ghosts. They didn't reproduce biologically, but they understood the mathematical weight of such a loss through observational data. Doctor met them in her office, a warm space filled with plants and photographs. One photo showed her with Emma, both of them laughing at a beach somewhere. Noticed she kept that photo in her direct line of sight from her desk. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us," began. "I know this is a difficult topic." Lisa smiled. "It's always difficult, but it's also important. What specifically would you like to know?" Decided on directness. How do you function? According to our psychological models, the loss you experienced should have made it nearly impossible to continue in your profession. You work with trauma patients. You face human suffering every day. How is that possible when you carry such enormous grief yourself? Lisa was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. The grief doesn't go away. I want to be clear about that. I think people expect that we heal or move on, but that's not accurate. Emma's absence is with me every single day. There are still mornings when I wake up and forget for just a second, and then I remember, and it feels like losing her all over again. Sara made a small sound. She could feel the truth of those words, the daily reopening of the wound. But here's what I learned, Lisa continued. Grief isn't the opposite of life. It's a form of love that continues after death. Emma is gone, but my love for her isn't. That love has to go somewhere, has to do something. So I put it into helping other people. Every patient I help through their trauma, I'm using what Emma taught me about love, about courage, about fighting even when you're scared. So you transform the emotional energy, suggested, trying to fit this into a framework he understood. No, Lisa said firmly. I'm not transforming it, I'm directing it. The love is the same. It just has a different target now. My daughter taught me that life is precious and short and worth fighting for. Now I fight for other people's lives. She's the reason I can sit with someone in their darkest moment and honestly say, you can survive this, because I know it's true. I'm living proof. Leaned forward. But doesn't that hurt? Doesn't it reopen your wound every time you engage with someone else's trauma? Yes, Lisa said simply. Every single time. But here's what I figured out. The pain isn't the problem. Avoiding the pain is the problem. When I try to hide from it, that's when it becomes unbearable. When I lean into it, when I use it, when I let it fuel my purpose, then it becomes something I can carry. It's heavy, but it's not crushing. She paused, looking at that photograph of Emma. My daughter fought so hard to live. She never gave up, even at the end when we all knew what was coming. She kept finding joy, kept loving us, kept being brave. How can I honor that courage by giving up myself? I can't. So I carry her with me and I keep fighting. Over the following weeks, they conducted 47 more detailed interviews. Each one revealed variations on the same impossible theme. Humans didn't heal from catastrophic loss in the way the team understood healing. Instead, they integrated the loss into their identity and used it as a foundation for new growth. A man named David in Lowe's Angels had survived a school shooting as a teenager. 12 of his classmates had died. He was now a trauma surgeon working in one of the busiest emergency rooms in the country. They died scared and alone, he told the team. Every person I save in the ER, I'm giving them what my friends didn't get. Another chance. More time. That's all any of us want, really. Just more time. An artist named Maria Santos in Brazil had lost her entire village to a mudslide. She'd been away visiting family in the city. Now she created massive murals depicting the faces of the dead. They exist because I remember them, she said. Every face I paint is a person who lived, who mattered, who loved and was loved. As long as I keep painting, they're not completely gone. Memory is a kind of immortality. A scientist named Dr. James in Singapore had lost his wife to a pandemic. He'd redirected his entire research career to studying infectious diseases. Died because we didn't understand the virus quickly enough, he said. I can't save her, but I can help save the next person. And the person after that, she was a teacher. She believed in making the world better, so that's what I do now. I teach the virus that it can't win, not while I'm still here. Sarah was struggling badly. The emotional weight of these interviews was crushing her. One evening, after speaking with a group of war veterans who'd all lost close friends in combat, she collapsed in their hotel room. I can't do this anymore, she said, her skin flickering between colors, unable to stabilize. The pain is too much. Every human we talk to is carrying wounds that would kill any Meridian, but they just keep going. They just keep fighting. How? How is this species still standing? Ran calculations while Sora recovered. He'd been documenting what he called the resilience paradox. In every other species, psychological resilience was a defensive trait. It was about protection, about building walls, about insulating yourself from further harm. But human resilience was offensive. They didn't build walls. They built bridges over their pain, turned their wounds into weapons, used their losses as fuel for action. I've identified the mathematical anomaly, announced. Human psychological development doesn't follow a recovery curve. It follows a growth curve. They're not trying to return to baseline. They're using trauma as a catalyst to become something new, something that couldn't have existed without the trauma. Nodded slowly. He'd reached a similar conclusion through less mathematical means. They recalibrate, he said. When catastrophe strikes, they're forced to rebuild their entire understanding of the world. But instead of rebuilding the same structure, they build something different, often something stronger. He pulled up his notes from an interview with an elderly woman in Poland named Anna. She'd survived the Holocaust as a child. She was 94 years old now, still sharp, still engaged. They'd spoken with her for 6 hours and had recorded every word. "Listen to this part," he said, playing the recording. Anna's voice thin but strong. "You want to know the truth about surviving the unsurvivable. You have to decide what kind of person you're going to be on the other side. The trauma will change you, that's not a choice. But you can choose the direction of that change. After the camps, I could have become bitter. I could have spent my life hatting. God knows I had reason to, but I decided that already took everything from me once. I wasn't going to let him take my future too, so I chose to believe in people again. To love again, to hope again, not because it was easy, but because it was the only way to really survive. If I'd let him turn me into something hard and hateful, he'd have won. Even from the grave, he'd have won. I refused to give him that victory." The recording continued. "The dead live on in how we choose to live. My mother, my father, my little brother, all the people who didn't make it, they're alive in every kind thing I do. Every time I help someone, that's my mother's hands, not just mine. Every time I refuse hatred, that's my father's voice, not just mine. This is how we defeat death itself. Not by forgetting or moving on, but by continuing. By being so stubborn about living that death can't win." The recording ended. The room was silent. Finally, Sara spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They've weaponized hope. That's what you said before, but it's more than that. They've learned to see death itself as a challenge. When the universe takes something from them, they don't accept it. They fight back by living harder, by loving more, by creating meaning where there should only be emptiness." "It's evolutionary," said suddenly. "It has to be. This isn't cultural or learned. It's too universal, too consistent across human populations. Humans evolved on a hostile planet with frequent catastrophes. The ones who survived weren't the strongest they were the ones who could experience devastating loss and still choose to continue. This is a survival trait that was selected for over millions of years." Felt something click in his mind. That's why they seem invincible. It's not that they don't feel pain. They feel it more deeply than any species we've studied. But they've evolved to use that pain as fuel instead of letting it paralyze them. Grief isn't a weakness in humans. It's a strength. Maybe their greatest strength. He stood up and paced the room. Think about it. Every other species tries to minimize pain, avoid loss, protect themselves from grief. But humans can't do that. They love too deeply, bond too strongly. So they had to evolve a different strategy. They had to learn to walk through fire and come out the other side not just alive, but transformed. "It's beautiful," Sora said quietly, "and terrifying." "Yes," agreed, "both of those things." They had one more interview scheduled. This one was different. They'd been contacted by a woman named Dr. Sarah, a researcher who studied near-death experiences. She'd heard about their project and wanted to share something important. They met her in Boston. She was in her 50s, energetic and direct. She placed a thick folder of papers on the table between them. "I've been studying people who survived close calls with death for 20 years, she said. Car accidents where they should have died, cancer survivals against impossible odds, cardiac arrests where they were clinically dead and came back. You know what almost all of them have in common?" "What?" asked. "They change, fundamentally change. They quit jobs they hate. They repair broken relationships. They take risks they never would have before. They stop wasting time on things that don't matter. It's like coming close to death gives them permission to really live." She opened the folder. "But here's the interesting part. I compared my subjects to people who experienced catastrophic loss like the ones you've been interviewing. And the pattern is the same. Whether you almost die or someone you love does die, the result is similar. You're forced to confront your mortality. And humans, we respond to that confrontation in a unique way. How? Zora asked. We rebel, Sarah said simply. We look death in the eye and we say, not yet, not without a fight, not without making it mean something. We're the only species that creates meaning on purpose. Every other animal just lives, but humans, we decide what our lives mean. And when death threatens that meaning, we don't surrender. We build new meaning, stronger meaning, meaning that can survive anything. She looked at each of them. That's what you're studying, isn't it? You're trying to understand how we survive the unsurvivable. The answer is that we don't just survive it, we use it. We turn it into fuel, we make it matter. Felt like he was finally seeing the complete picture. Humans had evolved on a planet where loss was constant and catastrophe was normal. They couldn't avoid pain, so they'd learned to do something no other species had managed. They'd learned to thrive because of pain, not in spite of it. That night sent his second report to the council. It was longer and more detailed than the first. He explained the pattern they'd discovered, the mechanism they'd identified, the implications he saw. He ended the report with a warning. Humanity doesn't just survive catastrophic loss. They're transformed by it in ways that make them psychologically unstoppable. They've evolved to use grief as a catalyst for growth. This makes them unpredictable and potentially dangerous, not because they're violent, but because they're unstoppable. A species that grows stronger from tragedy cannot be defeated by tragedy. The Council needs to consider what this means for first contact. The Council's response came faster than expected. They wanted a demonstration. They wanted proof that this human resilience was real and not just confirmation bias on its part. They were sending an observer, a senior psychologist named Doctor, who specialized in detecting false patterns in research data. Doctor arrived 3 weeks later. He was a species known for their skepticism and analytical rigor. He was also new, deeply opposed to early first contact with emerging species, believed that most species needed at least 1,000 years of post-spaceflight maturity before they were psychologically stable enough for galactic integration. "Show me," said simply when he arrived. "Show me these supposedly unbreakable humans." Had prepared for this. He'd arranged a series of visits to different sites across Earth, each one chosen to demonstrate a different aspect of human resilience. The first stop was a hospital in Boston, where they'd been granted permission to observe a support group for parents who'd lost children. Watched the meeting with visible skepticism. 12 humans sat in a circle, each one telling their story. A mother who'd lost her son to suicide. A father who'd lost his daughter to a drunk driver. A couple who'd lost twins in a premature birth. The stories were devastating, each one more painful than the last. But then something happened that had seen before but hadn't. The humans started helping each other, not with advice or platitudes, but with genuine understanding. They spoke about their darkest moments with honesty that was almost brutal. And then they spoke about how they'd found ways to continue. One woman, whose teenage son had died by suicide 3 years earlier, ran a hotline for struggling teens. "I can't save my son," she said, "but I can answer the phone when someone else's son calls for help. Maybe I can be the voice that makes a difference for them." A man whose daughter had been killed by a drunk driver had become an advocate for stronger DUI laws. Rachel was 17. She had her whole life ahead of her. "I can't give that back to her, but I can fight to make sure fewer families have to go through what we went through. That's what I can do. That's what I have to do." After the meeting was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "They're not pretending. They really have found a way to function while carrying these wounds." "Yes," said, "and it's not just function. They're thriving. That's what you need to understand. They're not just surviving their losses. They're using them as foundations for new purpose." Over the next 2 weeks, saw the pattern repeat everywhere. They visited a community of wildfire survivors in California who'd rebuilt their town with improved fire defenses and now helped other communities prepare for wildfires. They met with military veterans who'd lost comrades in combat and now ran programs to prevent veteran suicide. They spoke with disaster relief workers, many of whom had survived disasters themselves. But the moment that changed mind came in a small town in Oklahoma. They met with a group of people who'd survived a tornado that had killed 160 people. The town had been completely destroyed. That had been 8 years ago. The town's mayor, a man named Robert Hayes, gave them a tour of the rebuilt community. He'd lost his wife and youngest daughter in the tornado, but he'd stayed, had led the rebuilding effort, and had helped transform the town into something stronger than it had been before. "Why did you stay?" asked him. "Why not leave, go somewhere without these memories?" Robert looked at him like he'd asked why the sun rises. "Leave. This is where Karen and Sophie lived. This is where they laughed and loved and mattered. How could I leave? That would be like erasing them. No, I stayed because this ground is sacred. Every building we rebuilt, I was thinking about them. Every new safety measure we put in place, I was protecting them in a way, protecting other people's Karens and Sophies." He gestured to the town around them. "You see all this? This isn't just buildings and roads. This is a memorial. This is love made concrete. Everyone here lost someone. And we all decided that the best way to honor our dead was to build something that would protect the living. We turned our grief into something useful, something good." That night asked to arrange one more meeting. He wanted to speak with someone who'd experienced multiple catastrophic losses, someone who'd been tested repeatedly, knew exactly who to call. They met with 3 days later. She was 72 years old, and her life story read like a catalog of human suffering. She'd survived a house fire as a child that killed her parents and younger brother. She'd lost her first husband to cancer when she was 30. Her son had died in a car accident at age 19. Her second husband had died of a heart attack 5 years ago. She'd also survived breast cancer herself. By any reasonable psychological standard, should be a broken person. She should be unable to form attachments, unable to find joy, unable to see any point in continuing. Instead, she was a foster parent. She'd taken in over 100 children over the years, providing temporary homes for kids who'd experienced their own traumas. She was currently fostering 2 teenagers, both of whom had been removed from abusive situations. They met her at her home, a warm and cluttered space filled with photographs and artwork from decades of foster children. Served them tea and cookies like they were old friends. "I know what you want to ask," she said before they could begin. "You want to know how I keep going after everything that's happened. You want to know the secret." "Yes," said, "is there one?" Mild. "There is, but it's not complicated. The secret is that love doesn't die when people do. The love I had for my parents, for my first husband, for my son, for my second husband, it's all still here." She tapped her chest. "It has nowhere to go anymore, not to them. So I give it to these kids instead. Every child I take in, I'm using what my mother taught me about care, what my father taught me about patience, what my husband's taught me about devotion, what my son taught me about joy." She picked up a photograph from a side table. It showed a young man in a graduation gown beaming at the camera. I fostered him when he was 14. He was angry, violent, completely shut down. Everyone had given up on him, but I looked at him and I saw my son. Not literally, but I saw a kid who needed what my son would have given him, a chance. So I gave him that chance, using what I learned from raising my own boy." She put the photo down gently. "Is 30 now, he's a social worker. He helps kids like he used to be. That's how it works. The love keeps moving forward, the grief becomes fuel. The loss becomes a bridge to helping others. We don't heal from catastrophe, not really. We incorporate it, we let it change us. And then we use that change to make the world a little bit better." Asked the question that had been bothering him since he arrived on Earth. "But doesn't it hurt? Doesn't loving again, knowing you'll lose again, doesn't that hurt?" "Every single day," said simply. "But here's what I learned. The hurt is the price of love. If I protect myself from the pain, I protect myself from everything. So I choose the pain. I choose to love these kids even though they'll leave. I choose to remember my dead even though it aches, because the alternative is becoming numb, becoming empty, becoming something less than human, and I won't do that. The people I've lost fought too hard for their lives. I won't dishonor them by giving up on mine. After they left house, was silent for a long time. Finally, he turned to and said something that the team had not expected. They're not immune to trauma. They're not even exceptionally good at processing it by our standards, but they've evolved something we've never seen before. They've evolved the ability to metabolize suffering, to break it down and rebuild themselves from it. It shouldn't be possible, but it is, and it's extraordinary. He paused, looking out at the city around them. We need to report this, but I don't think the council will believe it until they see it themselves. Humans are unprecedented, and that's going to change everything about how we approach first contact. The Quantum Link message to the council that night was brief but momentous, confirms findings and added his own assessment. Humanity represents a new category of psychological development. They don't just survive catastrophe. They require it to reach their full potential. Recommend immediate elevation to first contact priority status with full psychological profile to follow. But had one more piece of research to complete. He needed to speak with someone who understood human psychology from the inside, who could explain the mechanism in terms that would make sense to the council. He needed to talk to a human psychologist who specialized in trauma. Dr. James was a professor at Columbia University who'd spent 40 years studying post-traumatic growth. He was also a survivor himself, a military veteran who'd seen combat and lost friends. When explained who they really were and what they were studying, wasn't surprised. I wondered when you'd show up, he said. It was pretty obvious you weren't really from a European university. Your questions were too specific, too focused. You were looking for something particular. They met in his office, surrounded by books and research papers. Was 71 years old, haired and calm, with the kind of presence that suggested he'd seen terrible things and made peace with them. Explain it to me, said. Explain how your species does this, how you survive what shouldn't be survivable. Thought for a moment, then began. The key is understanding that humans evolved with death as a constant companion. Unlike species that had long and stable environments, we came from a world that tried to kill us constantly. Predators, disease, natural disasters, violence from other humans. Loss wasn't exceptional for our ancestors. It was normal. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city. So we had to evolve psychological tools to cope with constant loss. We developed strong social bonds because groups survived better than individuals. But those bonds meant we felt loss more deeply. It was a trade-off, social cohesion for emotional vulnerability. But that would seem to create more suffering, said. Why would evolution favor a trait that causes pain? Because the pain served a purpose, explained. Grief is what makes us remember. It's what makes us careful. It's what makes us value life. A species that doesn't feel grief doesn't value what it has, and a species that doesn't value what it has won't fight to protect it. He turned back to face them. But here's where it gets interesting. We also evolved the ability to find meaning in suffering, because if suffering is constant and meaningless, why continue? Why not just give up? So we developed narrative thinking. We tell ourselves stories about why things happen and what they mean. We create purpose where there is none. Isn't that delusional? Asked. Maybe, said with a slight smile. But it's a useful delusion. When I lost my squad members in combat, I could have told myself it was meaningless, random chance, bad luck, and that would have been accurate, but it wouldn't have been useful. So instead, I told myself that they died protecting something important, that their sacrifice mattered, that I had a responsibility to live well because they couldn't. That story got me through the next day, and the day after that. And eventually, thousands of days later, here I am. He sat back down. That's the human trick. We don't deny reality. We don't pretend the pain isn't real, but we impose meaning on it. We decide what our suffering will create. And that decision, that choice, that's what makes us unstoppable. Because you can take everything from us, but you can't take our ability to decide what it means. Sora spoke up. But the emotional cost must be enormous. I can feel it in every human I encounter. This constant, active choosing, this refusal to accept meaninglessness, it must be exhausting. It is, agreed. Humans are tired, we're always tired, but we're also always moving. We rest, we grieve, we feel the weight, and then we get up and we continue. Because that's what humans do, we continue. He looked at each of them. You want to know if we're ready for first contact, if we're stable enough to join your galactic community. I can't answer that. But I can tell you that whatever you throw at us, whatever challenges come, we'll adapt. We always do. It's our specialty. We survive the unsurvivable, and then we build something new from the ruins. Made his decision. Doctor, there's something I need to tell you. You're the first human to know this officially. The Council is moving forward with first contact protocols. Within the next generation, probably within the next 20 years, humanity will learn that they're not alone in the universe. This conversation is part of our final assessment. Was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're worried about how we'll react." "Yes." "You're worried we'll panic, that the revelation will cause psychological collapse on a global scale." "It's a concern," admitted. Laughed a deep, genuine sound. "You really don't understand us yet, do you? Humans won't collapse. We'll do what we always do. We'll be scared, yes. We'll be confused. There will be chaos and fear and probably some violence. But then we'll adapt. We'll create new stories, new meanings, new purposes. Learning we're not alone in the universe isn't a catastrophe. It's an opportunity. It's the next chapter." He stood up again, animated now. "Do you know what the most common human response to disaster is? Not despair, not collapse. It's what do we do now? We're solution-oriented. We're forward-focused. You tell humanity that aliens exist, and after the initial shock, you know what we'll say. How can we learn from them? How can we work with them? What comes next?" He looked directly at. "You're trying to figure out if we're psychologically ready for first contact, but you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether we're ready. The question is whether you're ready for us. Because once humans know the galaxy exists, we're not going to be content just watching from Earth. We're going to want to be part of it. We're going to push and question and challenge and grow. That's what we do." The final report took 3 weeks to write. It was the longest and most detailed first contact psychological assessment ever submitted to the Council. He included interviews, data analysis, historical context, and projection models. But the heart of the report was simple. Humans had evolved a unique psychological adaptation. They processed catastrophic loss by integrating it into their identity and using it as fuel for continued growth. They created meaning deliberately, imposed purpose on suffering, and refused to accept defeat even in the face of overwhelming odds. This made them psychologically resilient in ways that no other known species could match. But it also made them unpredictable. They didn't follow the standard patterns of development. They took risks other species avoided. They pushed boundaries constantly. They asked questions that sometimes had no good answers. The recommendation made was unprecedented. He recommended not just first contact, but active integration. Humans shouldn't be observed from a distance or slowly introduced to galactic civilization over centuries. They should be brought in as full partners, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. "Humanity doesn't need protection from the truth," he wrote. "They need the truth. They'll use it the way they use everything else, as a catalyst for growth. The galaxy has never encountered a species like this. We should welcome them, learn from them, and accept that they will change us as much as we change them." He added one final note, a personal observation. "I came to Earth expecting to study a broken species. Instead, I found the most unbreakable beings in the known universe. Not because they don't break, but because they've learned to forge themselves anew from the shattered pieces, often into something stronger than they were before. Humanity doesn't just survive catastrophic loss. They allow it to catastrophically rebirth them. This is their gift and their danger. The council must decide which matters more. The response came 6 weeks later. The council had voted and the decision was made. Humanity would be contacted within 25 years. The galaxy was going to meet Earth, and Earth was going to meet the galaxy. S team prepared to leave Earth. They'd been there for nearly a year, longer than originally planned. In that time, they'd learned more about human psychology than they'd learned about any species in decades of research. On their last day, something unexpected happened. A young woman approached them at their hotel. Her name was Jennifer Park, and she was a graduate student in astronomy. She'd been working at a nearby observatory, and she'd figured out what they were. "You're not human," she said simply. "You're aliens, aren't you? Real aliens." For a moment, no one spoke, then made a decision. The protocol said to deny, to deflect, to maintain the cover. But looking at this young human, seeing the intelligence and curiosity in her eyes, he couldn't do it. "Yes," he said, "we are." Jennifer Park didn't panic. She didn't scream or run. She simply nodded like he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. "Are you here to hurt us?" "No, we're here to understand you." "And do you understand us?" Thought about all the interviews, all the research, all the data. He thought about Sarah and her support group, about Lisa and her grief practice, about and her foster children, about all the humans who'd shared their stories of loss and resilience. "I'm beginning to," he said. Jennifer sat down at their table uninvited. "I survived a school shooting when I was 16, she said. 4 of my classmates died. My best friend died next to me. For a long time I didn't understand why I lived and she didn't. It felt random, meaningless." She looked up at the sky, visible through the hotel's glass ceiling. "But then I realized that Emma had always dreamed about finding aliens, real aliens. She had this poster in her room of different hypothetical alien species, and she used to talk about how incredible it would be if we found them, if we could talk to them, if we could learn from them." Her eyes met. "So I became an astronomer. I dedicated my life to searching for signs of life beyond Earth. And now here you are, real aliens in front of me. Emma's dream is happening and she's not here to see it, except she is in a way, because I'm here because of her. She made me who I am. Her dream is alive through me." She smiled, and it was the same complex expression had seen on so many human faces, sad and strong and determined all at once. That's the human trick, isn't it? We turn our dead into reasons to live. We carry them forward. We make sure they matter. Emma's not gone. She's right here. She's the reason I found you. Felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't just a survival mechanism. It wasn't just psychological resilience. This was something deeper. Humans had learned to make death itself serve life. They'd learned to transform the ultimate ending into a new beginning. "Your species is remarkable," he said quietly. "We're just doing what we have to do," Jennifer said. "We love, we lose, we continue. That's all. That's everything." She stood up. "When you make contact officially, when you tell the world that aliens are real, people are going to ask why you came. What can you tell them?" Considered his words carefully. "Tell them we came to learn. Tell them we found teachers. Tell them that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy isn't your technology or your art or your science. It's your refusal to let suffering be the end of the story. You've shown us that even the deepest wounds can become foundations for new growth. That's a lesson the galaxy desperately needs." Jennifer nodded slowly. "And what are you going to tell your people about us?" "That they should be ready," said, "because humanity is coming, and nothing will ever be the same." The ship left Earth that night, climbing silently into orbit, and then vanishing into faster-than-light travel. Watched the planet shrink behind them, that blue marble covered in resilient, impossible, unstoppable humans. Sora was already recovering now that she was away from the overwhelming emotional broadcasts of 8 billion grieving, loving, hopping humans. Was processing the data, trying to create models that would predict human behavior in first contact scenarios.